All right, well, we've hit the top of the hour, so I'm going to kick this off with a little preamble. So my name is Matt. I am the lead of the design practice at iTrellis. Today, I'll be playing chat host and QA host for this webinar session. Some quick notes before we get started. So number one, this meeting will be recorded. We have a lot of people joining, so we will not be allowing attendee audio and video during the presentation, as I stated before. Number two, if you have questions for the presenter during the presentation, put them into the Q&A box. If you have a question that has already been asked, be sure to upvote that question so that it has a higher visibility and I can grab it. If you have comments, please use the chat. And we have reactions enabled, so if you like something, you can actually like it. And number three, if the presentation, after the presentation, we'll answer as many questions as we can during the final QA segment. But if we don't get to them, then we will follow up with the question askers via the email that you registered with. So that's kind of our house cleaning. And for the intro here, today's presenter is Chris Johnson. Chris is a Microsoft MVP in DevOps. He is the founder and principal consultant of iTrellis, the company that makes Portfolio++. The team has put considerable thought and effort into this feature. It's already proving immensely useful for us and our clients, and we hope it lands just as well, if not better, for you guys. So I'll hand it over to Chris so he can walk us through the capacity feature of Portfolio++ and how it can be used for program-wide capacity planning. Chris, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. And what you should see is the landing page for the iTrellis internal Azure DevOps organization. This is the way that we organize our projects. Now, to get started with Portfolio++, you go into a project. You wouldn't normally see these environments that we use for testing, but Portfolio++ is located here in the nav bar. Now, for this demonstration, I've put together a roadmap that's built by team. And this reflects some of the work that's going on right now here at iTrellis. And what I would like to do is go through the process of talking briefly about a roadmap and how it provides alignment for teams, backlogs, on a timeline, and then talk about the reason that we built the capacity view and how the two work together. Essentially, what we've found after supporting the marketplace since the release of Portfolio++ is that people do like to see their backlogs on a timeline, and they do like the roll-up of the features like this, where I can expand the roadmap and show all of its children and roll all of the metrics up. And after a while of organizing this material, two questions continue to come up. And that is, do we have the capacity to build this work, and how much will it cost? Now, in this particular case, these are live epics. And one of the things that we're working on right now are user-selected metrics and color-coded cards. And so if I look at this epic and I turn on dependencies, I can see that there are two dependencies here from the design practice. And when I look at the IP team, I can see that there are dependencies here. And so right now, I feel pretty good about the flow of the work. I feel pretty good about the coordination of the design team. But what I'm not sure about is how all of the work across the iterations fits into these features that I've developed. So as an example, if I expand some of the features that we're constructing and take a look at some of the user stories and the tasks, I don't really have a feel for how much loading there is for each of the teams in their sprints without going to looking at the sprints and looking at the tasks And if a team isn't using tasks and they're only operating at the requirements level with user stories, how do I see that? And so those are some of the questions that we wanted to answer. And so the first thing we did in terms of improvements to Portfolio++ is that we added the ability to show the team's iteration path for each of the teams on the roadmap. And so now you can see the iterations. This is a quarterly view. I'm going to move it down to a monthly view so that I can actually see the iterations. And as you can see, it's for 2025. That's the time period that we're looking at. Now, with respect to the capacity view, given this context, what I'd like to do is go through the setup of how to construct a capacity view, and then we'll switch to a fully developed capacity view and talk about some of the patterns and the way to interpret the data that you see. So this is the new feature that we've added. It should show up here. In terms of the view, we've also created some additional view controls where you can turn the capacity view on and off, Kanban view, the status tab, just little things. As Portfolio++ has become more powerful, the UI has also become a bit more complicated, and our goal is to make this as simple as possible and show people what they need to see. So as a program manager or a team lead, if you construct a roadmap, you can release it publicly, locked, and you can turn off some of these views depending on what you want people to see and what you don't want them to see. In this case, I want people to see the capacity view. So switching over to the capacity view, this is the starting point, and it works very similarly to the way that you would build a Portfolio++ roadmap. The first step is to go to Settings, and then click on Capacity to select teams. And so in this case, we're going to again select the IP team, and we're going to hit Save. Now I can add as many teams to this plan as I want. Now, by default, when you build a capacity view for the first time, it's going to go and grab all iterations for the team for all time. And so in this case, it's going back to 2020 when we first started this project, and it's created just a whole number of, it's grabbed the iterations that we've created for the project. And so what I would like to do is match this roadmap with the capacity plan. So if you recall, in the roadmap, we had the range set from January 1st, 2025 to December 31st, 2025. So switching back to the capacity view, I'm going to set the same date range. Okay, and now I have the same date range. And so this is a little easier to work with. Now, what I'm going to do to demonstrate the way in which to work with the capacity plan is just focus on a couple of the iterations here and talk about the different ways to manipulate the view. And then we're going to switch over to a much larger plan where you can see how these simple actions across the iterations can provide very interesting insights into the historical performance of the team, as well as the ability to forecast going forward with the intent of creating a reasonable plan with reasonable work-life balance that everybody can live with. That's the goal. And so if I take a look at these iterations for each of the teams, the fields that I have over here on the left are budget, forecast hours, sprint capacity, sprint commitment, and completed work. And so the basic idea is we're going to start with sprint capacity. And I'd like to point out that we're working in the tasks backlog level. This is seamlessly integrated with Azure DevOps. And so when we talk about sprint capacity at the task level for an iteration, and I see the number 70 as a calculated field, if you click on it, it will take you directly to that iteration for the team, and you can see the people who have signed up for work. And so in this case, we've got 7 hours worth of work during this week, or 70 hours if you think of it times 10. And so these other fields work the same way, but they're slightly different. So sprint capacity is what people have signed up for. Sprint commitment is the work that the team has taken into the sprint. And so if I click on this, that will produce a custom query that tells me what are the work items that have been pulled into the sprint. And similarly, if I look at completed work, it will pull up a very similar query, but it will also include completed. And so what's important to note in terms of the fields that we're using the defaults that are provided by Azure DevOps. And so in the case of the Agile process template and the CMMI process template, at the task level, original estimate and completed work are included. In Basic and Scrum, by default, the only field is remaining work. And in order to do capacity planning, we need to have an initial commitment and we need to know what the completed work is. And so if those fields don't exist on the task level in the process templates that you're using, you need to make them visible. Other than that, the capacity view works pretty much right out of the box based on existing process templates. Now, one other thing that's interesting to note is that if you don't fill in a field for completed work, we just use the original estimate by default, meaning that if you estimate it at 40 hours and you don't fill in completed work and you close the task, we're going to count 40 hours. So, in a nutshell, sprint capacity is how much time the team signs up for. Sprint commitment is how much work did the team pull into the sprint, and then completed work is how much did they actually complete. Now, one of the problems that we've had as a development organization is forecasting into the future. And so the only way that we were able to do it at the task level would be to, if we wanted to paint a picture on our roadmap of work going off into the future, we would need to put tasks into future iterations that had just a whole lot of hours to cover what we imagined the work would decompose into. And that was very awkward. It led to a lot of rework. It led to a lot of cruft in Azure DevOps. And so what we've done instead is that we've introduced this notion of a field called forecast hours. Now, as a planner, what the purpose of this field is for someone who's responsible for the iterations or the team to say how much time is going to be budgeted, how much effort is going to be budgeted, whatever your metric is. At the task level, it's hours across every process template. At the requirements level, if we switch and look at requirements so that people who don't do tasks can also use the capacity view, it depends on the process template that you're using. If you're using Scrum, it's effort. If you're using CMMI, it's size. If you're using Agile, it's story points. But in this case, we're going to do the demonstration in tasks because that's the way that we work. Now, forecast gives you the ability to say, I'm going to allocate X number of hours to the team at a cost of X. And so these fields do not come from Azure DevOps, whereas these fields do. And as you noticed, when I first created the capacity view, all of these fields were pre-populated based on what is in your Azure DevOps today, or in this case, our Azure DevOps organization for this iteration. And so on average, I tend to say that I'm going to allocate 80 hours worth of work for the team. Now, as I did that, these calculated fields became color-coded. And the color coding is an option that you can set, in this case, based on forecast hours, where I am setting tolerance against what I've budgeted. Meaning that if I set the and I did it over here. So let's do this again. And so I set the tolerance, well, by default, it's at 66%. I tend to want the team to work at 80% or commit to 80% of the work that's been forecast. And this is, and what I mean by that is if I forecast 80 hours of work for the team, that's the time that I have to pay people. But it's also a very common convention for people to sign up for 6 hours of work a day as opposed to 8, so that they have 2 hours to just handle other stuff, including feeding themselves. So we tend to set the tolerance, somewhere in this range of what's good enough. And then yellow becomes an area of concern, and red, typically becomes an area of we should have a discussion about this. And so if I go through that process for each one of these iterations, historically, I can see how the team performed, what they committed to, what they brought into the sprint, what they delivered against what I've forecast over time at a glance across the entire iteration path for the team. The next question is, how much does this cost? And that's entirely up to you. However you choose to budget for a sprint for the team. It's a pretty safe bet that you need to look at the number of people that are involved, the number of hours that they're putting in, apply some sort of metric or average hour or specific, this person costs this amount of money. But at the end of that process, however you choose to do it, this is where you put that budget number for this sprint. And so this can vary over time. During the holidays, it might be dramatically reduced or zero, depending on whether the team is working or not. Again, this is entirely up to you. Now, the data that's coming to populate these fields comes from Azure DevOps. And I also want to say that we follow the Microsoft permissions model very strictly. And so all of the work that I'm showing you, if you tried to do capacity planning for a team that you don't have access to, you wouldn't be able to load the team. You wouldn't be able to see it. But if you do have access to the team, you would be able to see these metrics across the sprints. Now, the other thing I want to point out is if I put in, $1,000 here, 1,000 here, 1,000 here, you can see that totals are coming up for each one of the metrics that are represented by each row. And so as I put in, $1,000 for each iteration, and this is obviously just an example, it totaled up to 3,000. And in this case, it's totaled up to 160 for the 280 hours that I put in. The key to the totals is that it is based on the date range. So if I want to know, and let me save this view, and before I move back to the roadmap, the information that I'm putting in here is saved with the view, not the roadmap. A roadmap can have multiple views. And so if you want to do what if analysis, like I've got a really rich plan where I've got a lot of time and it costs a lot of money, and then I've got the bare bones minimum plan that I'm just doing the bare minimum of what I think I need to do and try to keep costs down, I can have a max and a min view. And the values that I'm putting in would be stored with each of those plans. So I could have one roadmap and multiple views of what that plan looks like for what if analysis purposes. And so in this case, the roadmap that I want to cost out and do capacity planning for was from 1/1 to 12/31. And so in this case, I want to do the same thing. And ultimately, if I were to fill in all of these boxes and then, through the end of the year as a forecast, I would be able to calculate the cost of what it takes for these teams to deliver the work that's in the roadmap. So that's the process that you go through to set up each one of these iterations and what these values stand for. Now, before we move on to a fully featured capacity plan where I've done all of these things, let's go back to the options. There are some program managers, leads, team members who may build a capacity plan, but they don't want to share the budget with the team. And so we've made it so that you can turn the budget off. Similarly, they may not want the team to understand how much time has been forecast. Maybe they just want to see what the team signs up for. And in that case, you can change the basis for the metrics to sprint capacity and turn forecast off. And if I say okay, then I can have a pure team level discussion about what are we going, how much time do we have and what can we sign up for? Void of the overarching program management where you've decided how much capacity you have and you can see what the team comes back with versus what you were willing to allocate. I found this to be very useful. The other thing is that you can change these titles. Like if you don't like sprint capacity and you want to turn it into whatever your vocabulary is, you can change these titles just by clicking on the edit and changing the labels. But no matter what you call these things, the way they work is how much time did the team sign up for, how much work did they pull into the sprint, and how much did they get done. Now, one other thing that we've done, in addition to updating the capacity view, in support of the capacity view, if you look at the roadmap, one of the options that we've created is the ability to show resolved work items as completed. And so if you want to, if a team has like a split test function and the team's done their part with respect to development and they move their work item to a resolved state, but they can't close it until the test team says, yeah, it works as designed, we can still show resolved work as completed. And so we've added this feature with the last release as well. This has been one of the more requested features so that we provide parity in the roadmaps to what is possible in the dashboard widget view. Okay, so that's the basics of how to set up a plan. Now I'm going to go back and pull up an actual release plan. As you can see, this looks very similar to what I was just showing you. But if I move to the capacity view, now we're looking at the same point in time. And if I switch to tasks, are fully fleshed out. And that's what I get for playing with the roadmap right before the presentation. Now, this shows that there are times where some teams are doing continuous delivery, other teams are not. And so it's up to you whether you fill in all of these values or not. But following the same process that I just showed you in terms of setup, now I can see the entire year and I can see historical performance, which helps to inform future capacity planning and resource allocations. And I can also see, how much cost went into development, design, marketing at a glance. I could change this view to a quarter. I could change it to one iteration. It's really, the totals reflect whatever you want to see in terms of the timeline. Now, where this gets interesting is if we switch this back to months, well, now I can see the entire capacity plan at a glance over time as a heat map based on the color coding, given the tolerances that I set. And so if I'm looking at the IP team, I can see that this team commits and delivers pretty consistently. And I can see that I've got work taken in the next couple of iterations. Now, we just delivered the capacity view, and actually I closed the capacity webinar before the meeting today because we're doing it. But after this release, we've had a few things that have come up. In particular, we had one client that had a massive Azure DevOps organization with hundreds of projects, and we ran into a scale issue, which we've since corrected. And so some of the, yes, Matt.
Oh, not to cut you off. I was just going to say I have some questions lining up, and actually one that's related to the comment that you just made about scale.
Yeah.
So this question came in from Cinnamon just 2 minutes ago, and so they were saying that the capacity tab is not rendering today after 10 or more minutes. Are there settings or adjustments that you can make to the date to improve that? And it says all other tabs render normally, and they previously were not experiencing this. So I think this may be a scale issue, but if you had some kind of optimization hints for how they might do that, yeah, provide them.
Well, first, I'd like to follow up with whoever that is. So hopefully you've captured the email address so that we can talk to them.
Indeed, I have.
Okay, but the scale issue in particular was that it was breaking our query strings because, as I mentioned earlier, we follow the Microsoft permissions very strictly. And so the query string that we were passing into the work item API and the analytics API provided by Azure DevOps, given the number of potential projects that were related to the capacity view, as well as the roadmap, given the parent-child relationships and cross-project child relationships, was either causing the string to be too long or there were too many work items to retrieve. And so we've since created a performance improvement that can handle very large data sets that we're going to be pushing here very shortly. And so whoever that person is, we would very much like to see that if our fix in that scenario works. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, so we recorded Cinnamon's comment about that, and I've also grabbed a few people out of the chat that were saying they had the same issue, so we can follow up with all of them. One more question. Jacqueline had a question about viewing the, first of all, they said thanks for introducing this view to them. They're excited to see this. And wondered if you could do a view on a specific team member instead of the entire team. And if we want to see kind of high or low performance on a specific person. This is a very common question that comes up.
Yeah. Not at this time. At this time, we've released the capacity view that fits the design of Azure DevOps precisely. And so if you look at the sprint board and go here, well, actually, let's just go here for this one. All of the titles are hyperlinked. And so if we go to the capacity view, you can see the capacity view, you can see the people. And we've created the same exact view for the requirements level. So if you go into requirements, this doesn't exist in Azure DevOps, but we have recreated that exact menu where you can specify the people. And so we have had questions about, can I see a person through the course of the team, and can I see what they have committed to over time? We've built this feature. We built a tool called Capacity++ in Power BI, but the processing required to process each project, each team, each individual person, and all of the work items and all of the tasks that they could possibly relate to is massive. And so that tool, while it worked, we had to build it in a batch mode, and it updated every 15 minutes, and it didn't fit our Portfolio++ mantra that you can make changes and immediately see them, and that it followed the structure of Azure DevOps. So we're still thinking about ways to do that because we do have the information. The question is, how do we show it in a way that fits this model? That's a good question, and that does come up, and we are thinking about it. Anything else, Matt?
Yeah, two more questions. First came from Christine. She said you've used a portfolio build by team in your demo. Will this
Yeah.
work in the same way with a build by project or a build by query?
No. As you can see, we've got very clear iteration paths here. And the only way that you have a clear iteration path is by team. And so if you look at your project configuration, the iterations can be all over the place. And a lot of teams create their own iterations. They want to have their own titles, especially when you have teams that are sharing a project across multiple areas. And so the project configuration iterations, we can't rely on those. Similarly, with queries, especially if you do a query across project for tags, we don't know what iteration that we would be able to show. So the only build method that we can use for the capacity view is by team. Anything else?
Yeah, one more question from Ian. In the budget view, where you can toggle the budget on and off, can you set it up using RBAC? So a certain level and higher can see the budgets, but not below that level. So essentially permission-based viewing on the budget specifically inside of the card.
Not at this time, but that's a terrific idea.
Yeah, that's a great feature request, Ian.
Yeah. Thank you. So the answer is no, but I like the thought. All right. Any other questions that are related to what I was showing in the setup?
Not in the moment.
Okay. Cool. And so where I was at, it was how to interpret the data or look for patterns in the capacity view. And so what I was saying about the IP team is that this team tends to deliver. And this team has work pulled into the next iterations. Now, here's the problem. After we delivered and we were kind of sideswiped into, everybody knows the drill. After you deliver, no matter how much you test, there's usually always one or two things that you need to correct. And in our case, we ran into a scale issue with very large Azure DevOps organizations that we have been working on. And so we've been pushing work forward. And as you can see here, there's way more work that's piled up into future sprints than we are allocating time for. And so now I've got to make a decision. Do I pull more developers in so that I can drive out the next color-coded metrics? Color-coded cards and user-selected metrics? Or do I push this out and even it out across time so that I'm not, asking the team to do way more than they can possibly and reasonably get done? And so that's a process that I'm going through right now. But the point is, I do have work allocated in the sprints that they can start working on now, which we have. And we are in the process of having very positive discussions about what we need to push out. And at the same time, I do have budget allocated into the future. So this team's in good shape. Now, when I look at the design practice team, I can see some areas where I see red, where I've allocated time and the team has signed up for that time. But then when I look at the completed work, it's not at the same level of what I allocated. And so if I go to take a look at it, I can see that the work was closed and the work wasn't nearly as large as what I, the program manager, had forecast. And so there is a problem here, but the problem's not the design team. The design team's great and they got things done really fast. I just allocated too much time. And so I can apply that in the future going forward. And so red is not always bad, but red creates a visible indicator that there's a difference between expectation and reality. And so it gives you hotspots that you can, go look at historically and do a better job planning going forward. Now, another question that we get is once you have a capacity plan, once you have a roadmap, what do we do with it? And how do we share it? Because not everybody's going to have the same level of permissions as you. And so the capacity view works the same way as the roadmap. If you click snapshot, it will give you an image of whatever is visible in your view. And so I can now have a capacity view that's 2025 from end to end. The other thing we can do is we can do a download, and it will produce a CSV file of all of the information that you see in here, which you can then apply in other ways programmatically, or import into other systems like Clarity or whatever other systems you guys use for resource management and P&L tracking. So it's important to note that Azure DevOps is not one of those tools. Azure DevOps is a development tool. It is focused on work. It enables collaboration, but the data that's in here can be used effectively in conjunction with other tools. And so we can pull out the actuals, we can pull out the future that's been allocated in a CSV file that you can use for your own purposes. So that's a quick summary of how to set up the capacity view. And there's some interpretation and ways of looking at the capacity view that I've shared with you today. I want to re-emphasize the value of being able to save multiple views depending on the audience you're talking to. Maybe it's a team and you want to turn some of these values off. Maybe it's an executive team and you want to have a more complete view. But these are things that are very, very helpful when it comes to portfolio planning, which is the purpose of Portfolio++. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Matt, for Q&A.
So we had one more question come in that is actually related to that last comment that you made. It was from Matthias, and Matthias says that I didn't see a share or download actions associated with that planning view. So going back to the status time board, Matthias says, if I want to share it with the user, as in my case, a PO role, do I have to do it through Portfolio? And I think if I'm reading between the lines here, what Matthias is bringing up an interesting point, which is Matthias wants to share this with higher ups. They want to share this with business, but they don't want to, they want to use the same Portfolio++ roadmap and share it with the team. How would they do that? Do they have to use just the permissions that are on the roadmap itself in order to share the view, or should they create a separate roadmap for the capacity planning that executives would see and then assign the permissions there?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it is a good question.
So let me think about that for a second. So just to make sure I understand it correctly, Matthias's goal is to have one roadmap and multiple views depending on the audience.
Right.
Okay. And in one case, Matthias wants to share it with the business team, and I would assume share much more information than what's being shared with the team.
Right.
And so the answer is that you can change the metadata on the information that's being shared on the capacity view and save it, and call that perhaps the team view, and then have a different set of metadata for the capacity view that's being shared with the business executive. So 2 views, 1 roadmap, and that should work for you. What was the part about sharing the roadmap, though?
I think Matthias was looking to see where were the share and download actions. I'm going to assume that what Matthias is doing right now is has a roadmap, configures it in such a way, and then goes into and then shares and downloads that configured view, maybe through a snapshot or something with certain people. Can you explain the part that you just went through about views? Could you just show where that is and how you would configure and set up different views so that people can see that?
Yeah. So as an example, I've got a 2025 view that I've created here. Oh, that's where my information went. And then I've got a Q2 2025 view. So if I switch to this view, oops, save those changes. All right, switch to Q2 2025. And so this will now only show me Q2 of 2025, and it's using the metadata that I set up here as opposed to all of 2025, and I can switch very quickly between those. It works the same way with the options that you're showing. And so I can switch the views depending on different configurations for different teams. So this is where the views are located. Now, the sharing is here. You can share a roadmap. You'd be sharing the entire roadmap, though. And so what a lot of people do is they get the roadmap or they get the capacity view exactly the way they want it, and then they take a snapshot of it. And that creates, I did this just a second ago, I'll do it again, a roadmap, and it's a PNG file, so it's scalar, you can zoom in on it. And, if you have a really long, really, really tall, lots of teams, or really wide, lots of iterations, roadmap, so that you don't lose specificity as you drill in and take a look at things, or if you want to print it and put it on a wall, or put it in a PowerPoint presentation. And so using snapshot is useful, especially when you're having executive meetings, because if you pop up the roadmap and you had everything exactly the way you wanted it when you went home from work, and then someone in between that and the time you give the presentation goes in and makes adjustments to your backlog, and suddenly your epics are way off into the future, and you've got a bunch of points that don't look right in your capacity view or hours. Taking a snapshot makes sure that that won't happen. Another reason to use the snapshot is for archive. Same reason. At the beginning of sprint planning, I have a number of teams who snapshot their roadmap, and I would assume are now snapshotting their capacity view, because as these values change, or as you move work from one sprint to another, these values change. And so if you want to see sort of the history of how things looked at different points in time, snapshot's very useful. Download is here. So you can share roadmaps, you can download the values from the capacity view, not from the roadmap. This is a feature that's unique to the capacity view. And snapshot, and it works the same way as roadmap. Do we have any other questions?
I think we've actually answered all of the questions that have come in so far, and we are just 2 minutes to time. So I think we've time boxed this perfectly. If anyone has any
Wonderful.
kind of final questions that you'd like to ask, you can go ahead and drop them into the Q&A, and we can try and answer those in the last few minutes that we have here. Otherwise, one of the comments that had come in was making a recording of this meeting available. We will do that. As soon as the session's over and the recording is completed, we'll post it for everybody to go and see. You can go and review all of the information that we've packed into this like 30-minute dense presentation.
Yeah, there's also, you just mentioned the video, right? That's on the iTrellis YouTube. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
right, yeah.
The speed version of what I just walked you through in 8.5 minutes is available on the iTrellis YouTube site. And if anyone has any questions, concerns, problems, we want to know, and we do want to help. This is a major version release. It's a V3 of Portfolio++, and so far, other than the one performance issue we've had, it's been working pretty well. But we don't know if you're having issues if you don't let us know. So thank you for coming. Thank you for your interest in our software, and please let us know if you have any questions.